Ohio State already had its plans for New Year's Eve. Now it's officially got its dance partner. Welcome to Snap Judgments on 97.1 The Fan and 10 TV Plus. That is Jeremy Birmingham. I am Austin Ward, and it's a Texas two-step, but A&M is not invited. Miami Hurricanes going to Kyle Field and win 10-3 on Saturday, so it'll be the number 10 seed taking on Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl. Birm, what did we just watch?
You watched two teams that played like they were aware that their season could end. Two teams that were, I don't know. You watch a game like that, and as an Ohio State fan, you're watching it and going, oh, neither of these teams look good. But the reality is they're both pretty good. They're both got a lot of talent. And when you play a really good team against another good team, sometimes the game looks ugly. Ohio State just, lost a game 13-10 2 weeks ago. So it's not as though you can't play ugly games. But certainly if you're watching that, you see what Miami does well on defense. You see a very active front four. You see a very athletic group on their defensive side of the ball, and an offense that looks like it's looking for an identity. And maybe they found one against Texas A&M with former Ohio State commitment Mark Fletcher, who had 172 yards rushing on 17 carries, including a 56-yarder on Miami's decisive touchdown drive. So it's a game that I don't know that it tells us much about Ohio State or what to expect, because ultimately I think we all believe that if Ohio State plays its best game, they will beat whichever team they were playing. And now they know it's Miami. It's interesting because I don't think from an offensive standpoint, Miami is that scary, but defensively, especially after the way Indiana handled Ohio State's offensive line, I think that's where, if you look at a spot for a potential upset, that's where Miami can get it.
Yeah, I don't think anybody needed to be explained to them how good Mark Fletcher was or why Ohio State wanted him and had him in for 8 months that he was committed to the Buckeyes at that time, Berm. Like, I don't think that comes as any sort of surprise, and there'll be plenty of built-in knowledge about what he can and can't do. However, if you're just trying to come in and run the football at Ohio State and Matt Patricia's defense, I don't really think that that's going to work. So, I would have thought the same thing if it was Marcel Reed or Texas A&M. And Carson Beck here with Miami, which is the actual matchups, that there are certainly going to be opportunities for the Silver Bullets to shut down Miami just the same way that the Aggies did until the final drive of the game. I'm much more interested about the way Miami's defensive front was able to generate so much pressure from start to finish, and probably going to do it in a lot of similar ways that Indiana did in the Big Ten championship game to Ohio State. So, there's another former Ohio State recruiting target on that defensive line for the U. You saw Akeem Mesidor and Ruben Bain making a ton of plays there at Kyle Field. Like, that's what it's going to come down to more than anything else. I think we can already start. Snap Judgments is probably going to be a familiar show to the next 2 weeks going into New Year's Eve. Ohio State's offensive line is absolutely going to have to meet that moment, and we still don't know for sure whether that means that Josh Padilla or Gabe Van Sickle or Ethan Oniano will be out there at right guard, or two or three or all of them rotating, but they're going to have their hands full against that Miami front.
Yeah, and that was the matchup. That is the part of the Miami program where you look at it and you say, if there's an area you give the Hurricanes an advantage over Ohio State, if you were doing a tail of the tape, I think that's the only spot you'd have one. And clearly it's a group that they lean on heavily. If Ruben Bain is going to be a first-round pick, Justin Scott, as you mentioned, a former Ohio State commit, in the middle there for them. But they also have really active and aggressive linebackers. And we watched what Indiana did against Ohio State, and it was just free runners. It was sending linebackers after Julian, saying, as long as you were able to get there quickly, the Ohio State passing offense can become a little bit easy to control if you get Julian under some pressure early. And certainly Julian is athletic, but he's no Marcel Reed, and Marcel Reed had a very difficult time escaping that front four on Saturday. But also, Marcel Reed is no Julian Sain when it comes to identifying the defense and throwing the ball and getting it out in time. So it's one of those things where I don't know if Ohio State, I think from the matchup perspective, knowing that you just went through what you went through against Indiana and their defensive front, I think actually it probably makes this feel like a little bit easier for Ohio State to prepare for.
Yeah, I mean, and now this preparation means that when you get to the Cotton Bowl, you won't have to worry about being overrun by Texas A&M fans. They will not, I assume, show up to the Cotton Bowl because the Aggies aren't going to be in it. Miami doesn't traditionally travel all that well with their fan base. We'll see. They've also just been to Texas at the first round game on Saturday, so we'll see how that plays out. But I never got the sense over the last 2 weeks, Berm, that Ohio State really cared that much who won this game. I didn't think that there was going to be a decisive advantage one way or the other, an opponent that they particularly wanted to match up with. Maybe there'll be some motivation or animosity based on the number of recruitments that it has been head-to-head matching up with Miami in and wanting to send a message there. Maybe Jeremiah Smith will feel some kind of way about, seeing the Hurricanes on the other sideline. Maybe that's the only way that you could get at this. Texas A&M and Ohio State doesn't, really move the needle in terms of like vitriol, but Miami might.
There's not a lot of love lost between these programs. Obviously, Ohio State ruined the Hurricanes program for the last 24 years, 25 years. So they obviously would love to get a shot to right things and to send Ohio State home. Obviously, Miami is personal for a lot of these kids. The Buckeyes recruit Florida very well. Miami and Ohio State, as you mentioned, it's not just Mark Fletcher, Justin Scott, Jordan Lyle, another guy in Miami's backfield. But it's also just a fan base that hates Ohio State in a serious way. Ohio State fans have all but pretty much laughed off Miami for the last 2 decades. So Miami has been seething under the surface, waiting for this sort of game. So I'm sure they'll have a lot planned for Ohio State. But again, I think from the stadium perspective, we talked about it on Thursday's show and on Friday, like Buckeyes fans should be able to overrun that stadium. It should be a 75-25 type of split, I think, based on what we know about the Ohio State traveling fan base and the Miami one.
Yeah, and having an entire month to prepare to go down there to Dallas or to Arlington more specifically. So, yeah, I mean, that was an ugly game, but I was skeptical that Miami would be able to go on the road and handle that. They don't often leave the Sunshine State to beat an SEC team in front of 104,000. I would have to tip my hat to the Hurricanes. And this now sets up a matchup that if you rewind to the end of September, it was, boy, this could be a potential national championship showdown. Carson Beck is playing improved football at that time. And then he went back into the interception mode. They lost those 2 games in the middle of that, in the middle of the schedule, had to bounce back and climb back into playoff contention. And people were, criticizing the Hurricanes and the ACC schedule and the ACC tiebreaker and, trying to discount their head-to-head win over Notre Dame. They proved that they belong. I don't want to take anything away from what they accomplished, but I don't know that still, having said all that this is a matchup that would strike fear in the hearts of Ohio State. I think they would have welcomed playing a hyped up Miami in September. And I think that they'll be more than willing to take their chances against them on December 31st.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ohio State knows, like, at its best, this Miami team can give you a hell of a game. Like, it's a really athletic group. Carson Beck on Saturday did not do much against Texas A&M, was not asked to, 14 of 20, only 105 passing yards, so it's 103 passing yards. It's not a game where they were really relying on their offense to win them the game, and they didn't really have to because their defense made Texas A&M incredibly one-dimensional, and Marcel Reed, as a one-dimensional passing-only quarterback, is not generally going to win many games. So, that's where I think Ohio State fans, if you're looking at this matchup and you say, how does it get away from Ohio State? That's how it is. I mean, if you look at Texas A&M on Saturday, 35 carries for 89 yards, total 2.5 yards a carry. We saw Ohio State have a very difficult time getting the run game going against Indiana. If you make the Buckeyes one-dimensional, if you make any team one-dimensional, it becomes a lot easier to beat them. And I think that's where, if you look at this total body of work, you think Ohio State is the better team, but all you need is one drive in these games. And the Indiana game showed that. It was 2 passes from Fernando Mendoza that beat Ohio State in that game because the Ohio State offense was not able to get off the mat. I don't worry about this from a defensive standpoint from Ohio State. I just worry offensively that they're limited and not really diving into the full capability of this offense based on what we've seen throughout the season. So will that change? Will Ryan Day's involvement change?
It has to.
Right. So, but will it? I don't know. I mean, Ryan Day has proven himself to be fairly stubborn at times. That is a part of his personality. But now you go into this game and you can't be one-dimensional and beat Miami. You're not going to be able to do it. So you need to find a way to capitalize and create some run game for the Ohio State offensive line. Now, the last time they were challenged like that was against Miami or against Michigan, and that was the best game they played all year, offensive line-wise. So will they be ready for that in that Miami front four? I think they will be.
Yeah, I mean, stubborn, is certainly an apt word to describe Ryan Day. He's also proven throughout his career when he's backed into a corner, when he's given extra time to prepare, when he's more heavily involved in the offensive game plan, and when I think all three of those things are true for him right now, he's been pretty good. So, you'll look at this and the number will vary, but Ohio State's going to be favored to win this game. They're going to have an edge in the crowd once you get to the Jerry World, and I think this is about as favorable of a matchup as you could want. And that's, again, splitting hairs, because I don't know. I would have said the same thing if Texas A&M had found a way to score on their final drive or punched in a 2-point conversion at the end. Interestingly enough, it does seem like special teams problems are not just unique to Ohio State in college football.
Well, no, certainly Miami missing 3 field goals. That sends a guy into the next round of the playoffs probably feeling a little wary about himself. Athletically, that's where Miami doesn't want to rely on kicking field goals, but they are limited offensively. And if you can control Malachi Toney, which I think Texas A&M did a really good job of that. They got him on the little jet sweep there at the end of the game for Miami's only touchdown. But that's a 3rd and 6 play at the 9-yard line. So if you can, that game goes completely different if you just tackle a guy. But it's going to be a good matchup. I think from an athletic standpoint, the only team Ohio State's played even close to this top to bottom is Texas. And the Buckeye offense only scored 2 touchdowns in that game. So I don't know. I'm looking at this game and I'm thinking you're talking probably a 17-7, 17-10 type of game coming up at the Cotton Bowl.
That's subject to change. I know you're going to change that score.
Yeah, maybe. I can see it. Well, I think we just have, we've all been waiting for Ohio State to be Ohio State on offense and do the Ohio State things. And this might just be who they are this year. So we'll see if that changes with Ryan Day's involvement. And as you said, the time. Now, the nice thing is you don't have to try to plan for 2 teams. So you know who your opponent is, and that's what matters.
Yep, it's locked in. Ohio State and Miami will meet at AT&T Stadium on December 31st in Arlington. Can't wait to get down there. Can't wait to get back into the Woody Hayes Athletic Center first. We will do that on Monday, both members of the offense and defense. Matt Patricia, I assume Brian Hartline. That's a college football playoff mandated rule that coordinators have to speak and be involved in the press conference. That would be, I think, pretty interesting. Those of us wanting to pick his brain. And, of course, Ryan Day will have that on Monday and a lot more coverage. We'll have a Born Blitz on the beat to kick off that week as well. So lots going on, and now we can narrow our focus to the Miami Hurricanes, just as Ohio State is as well. Thanks for joining us on a little Saturday Snappy J on 97.1 The Fan and 10 TV. He's Birm. I am Austin. We will talk to you on Monday.